be a part of the cake is dawning on forecasters, dawning on the market as we get down to this level where it seems harder and harder to push and get to the target here. I think that's the question. And that raises that issue of the sacrifice ratio. How much does the Fed want to give up in order to get to target? Will it sacrifice another half a point or a point in the unemployment rate? Will it sacrifice below trend growth? Or will it say, you know what, 2.5 is good enough?
Steve, thank you. Let's bring in somebody who probably has a pretty good idea about what he thinks about it. Former Federal Reserve Vice Chairman Roger Ferguson, who is also the former president and CEO of TIAA. Now he's the vice chairman of the Business Council and a CNBC contributor. And Roger, what do you think? Would the Fed be willing to sacrifice unemployment and or the economy in order to get to that inflation down all the way to 2%?
I think the Fed has no choice but to focus in on the 2% and, if need be, engineer below trend growth and a rise in unemployment. I think credibility depends on it. To say anything else is to leave open the question of what is the acceptable inflation target, and I think that would be unwise at this stage.
Which means you are expecting no cuts this year?
I've moved in, well, for a period of time I've been saying, the odds of no cuts have gone up. I think now it's 50-50. The most recent inflation data has certainly been disappointing any way you look at it, headline or core, and things that have already been stalling. So this is the third month in a row where, inflation looks like it's moving sideways at a number that is distinctly above, 2%, closer to 2.7, 2.8 at the core for PCE. So I think 50-50, whether or not there are any cuts this year. And I think there's now even market chatter of a possible hike. I think that's not the likely outcome, but that's also starting to get into the conversation.
Bloomberg did a really interesting study where they analyzed 50 or 60,000 headlines to see what the impact was of Powell's kind of dovish pivot back in December of last year. They came to the conclusion, which we've known this was roughly the conclusion, the idea that equity markets picked up as a result, but they also put a number on it. They think that inflation picked up a 0.5 percentage point as a result, just from him talking about the possibility for rate cuts. Does that sound plausible to you? And if that's the case, do you think Chairman Powell will be far more careful about what he says next?
Well, the chairman always has to be careful, but it goes back to the earlier point we made. Any inkling that maybe, the 2% target is not rock solid, and you risk some unmooring of what has been pretty well established, inflation expectations. And that's a really important part of the game here. And so one of the reasons I think we're going to hear a much stronger tone about getting inflation to 2% is to keep financial conditions, in check, so to speak, and importantly, and they understand this, to maintain inflation expectations where they have been for a period of time. So that kind of Bloomberg study, I think, simply quantifies things that, folks in central banking have known as a qualitative matter for quite a period of time. What you say matters. It drives inflation expectations.
It's a good thing you said it twice, because I missed some of the nuance the first time you said it. You are basically saying you think Chairman Powell is going to be much more hawkish in his commentary this week, and the markets better prepare?
I think so. I think he's got to focus in on the reality that inflation has been running hot. I think he's clearly going to take, the number of cuts down. This is not one of those meetings where they have their official dot plots. But absolutely, I think he's going to clearly push back on the notion of 3 cuts, maybe push back on the notion of 2 cuts even. I think he's going to have to open the possibility of no cuts, and all of that to maintain credibility around the 2%.
I know you're not a markets expert, but do you think the market is anticipating that at this point? You think that comes as a little bit of a surprise?
Look, I think the market has pushed back its initial expectation of a cut, I think now to November. And I think they might still be pricing in the possibility of 2 cuts. So I think a slightly more hawkish tone, while it wouldn't be a shock, should be expected, but it will surprise some people who I think haven't been really, reading the data and giving the credibility to the Fed that it deserves.
Roger Ferguson, thank you, sir.